Rosh Hashanah. So there's a lot of interplay between what we're going to study now and the motif of a new year. In this week's Torah portion, we continue with Moses' last will and testimony as he is about to go as the Jewish people are about to go into the land of Israel, and he's about to go to his death. So Moses is getting ready to bring the Jewish people to the land of Israel, knowing that he's not going to go with them. And throughout this book, as we mentioned previously, he enjoins them over and over and over again to remember everything that he taught them, and that he taught their parents mostly, because this is the generation that's going into the land of Israel. So it's not the generation necessarily that came out of Egypt, it's a new generation. And he wants to impress upon them the values of Judaism. He wants to impress on them the ethical mores of Judaism. And he also wants to impress on them the human frailty in face of trying to just work out life. That in as much as they could be devoted and truly committed to living the life of the Torah that he taught them, that once they get into the land of Israel and they become a society, and they will deal with organized societal life, and they will also deal with the influence of the Middle East, it will become their culture, that they will be swayed perhaps by the surrounding culture, and this will be something that will hurt them and undermine the messaging and undermine their theology to the Torah. So we have here is almost a plea. And this is I would say this is a motif that kind of underlies the entire book of Devarim. And as Moses gets closer and closer to the end, that kind of intensifies, because he knows that he's reaching his last moments with the Jewish people, the last moments that he could influence them, and that he can have some kind of impression on them. And then when he dies, this project of bringing the Jewish people to the land of Israel, the project of bringing the Torah down to this world, is really going to be in the hands of the generation that is now going into the land of Israel. And he has to pass it over to them in a way that would really inculcate their heart, their mind, in a way that they can not only keep it for themselves, but that they can keep it for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And as we mentioned many times before, really this is nothing short of miraculous that Moses was able to do this. And if you think about it, it's so difficult to stay focused on a culture that does not mesh with the culture that you are living in today. So for example, if you speak to anyone, for example, who has immigrant parents or grandparents, you know that one of the great struggles that people have when they immigrate into a country is that while they will have fidelity and devotion to the customs, the culture, the food, or whatever it is that they come from, the new generation wants to be fitting in. They want to be hip, they want to be cool. In as much that they have an emotional attachment to their previous culture, they'll hold on to it to some extent. But ultimately, the next generation, and certainly the one after that, really assimilates into the culture and becomes part and parcel of the culture. And it's truly very difficult to say that a person should swim upstream like a salmon and hold on to a culture that their grandparents had because it was important to their grandparents. It's a really difficult situation to be put in. And Moses understands this. So there is an urgency in his last will and testament that conveys the frailty and the fragility of this idea that we're going to pass on the culture of Torah to this generation, who needs to pass it on to the next generation, and who needs to pass on to the next generation, and so on and so on and so forth. And if we look at it, 3,000, almost 3,500 years later, we're studying Torah, in as much that every generation will have like a certain attrition rate where people will fall away from Judaism because they find the Judaism difficult to maintain because of all the responsibilities that Judaism entails upon us. But nevertheless, if a certain generation is weakened, then the generation or two or three that follows will come back stronger. And this is the story of the Jewish people, always coming back, always coming back. So Moses succeeded, I think, even beyond his wildest expectation to pass on the message. So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine the words of Moshe. What did he say to them that actually conveyed the concept of holding on tight to their heritage? Now, in this week's Torah portion, Ki Tavo, which we're going to get into shortly, there's two overarching things. One is all the good things that will happen if you keep the mitzvot. And then all the terrible things that will happen should you not. Now, I have to say that on a certain level, Ki Tavo is one of the most difficult Torah portions to study. I personally find it really difficult to get through it because whereas the beginning of the Torah portion, God is telling the Jewish people through Moses is actually telling the Jewish people, if you are keeping the mitzvot, you're going to have blessing, you're going to have an abundance, you're going to have financial blessing, spiritual blessing, you're going to see intergenerational cohesiveness, you're going to see protection from your enemies, you're going to have an abundance of wealth. But if you lose the program, you're going to lose your way, and ultimately what's going to happen to you is you're going to end up being exiled from the land of Israel. You're going to be exiled from the land of Israel, and in being exiled from the land of Israel, you're going to go to far-off countries, and there you're going to suffer terrible persecution. You are going to become a symbol of persecution. It's astonishing, actually, that this is all laid out in the Torah, that the Jewish people will become a symbol of persecution. And indeed, that is what the Torah portion talks about. It talks about all the diseases that will come to the Jewish people. It talks about the fact that there will be times in the history of the Jewish people that people will need to save themselves and then ultimately do very cruel things to their children or to their relatives. Everything that has ever happened in the history of the Jewish people is laid out in this week's Torah portion. So it's a difficult Torah portion to read because of the harshness of it. But the overarching theme is pay attention. There's something important that I'm going to tell you, and let's go on with it. And it's interesting, though, that the Torah portion opens up with what? It opens up with the concept of Bikurim. What is Bikurim? Bikurim is the first fruits that the Jewish people had to bring to the temple. So there was this mitzvah that the Jewish people had to take the first fruits. When a farmer saw his orchard was starting to blossom, he would take the first emerging blossom that looked like a fruit. He would go to each tree, tie a little ribbon around it, around that fruit, and then when the tree blossomed and the fruits start to grow, he would take off, and the fruits were ready, he would take off the fruit from that labeled branch and bring the baskets of this to Jerusalem to give as a present to the Kohanim. So it starts off with gratitude. And we've touched on this many, many times, the idea of gratitude. But today what I want to talk about is literally the verbiage that is found in this Torah portion and the rabbi's commentary on the verbiage and how that impacts us today, and also what message it has for us as we approach Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we're going to get into that very, very quickly. I just want to bring up to your attention that now we are in the second week of Elul. So being that we're in the second week of Elul, we're already getting close to Rosh Hashanah, and the spirit and the energy of the high holidays is truly starting to seep into our consciousness. And so therefore, we know that when we come to Rosh Hashanah, we are at a crossroads. We are closing a year and opening a new one. And we go to shul. This year, probably not shul. We make prayers. Last year, I found myself at home during Rosh Hashanah, praying at home to the best of my ability. So we definitely pray. we get together, we have the meal, the apple and the honey, we have wishes for a good, sweet year. So there's a lot of focus on the past and also on the future. And, as we mentioned many times, that's one of the activities that we're supposed to be engaged in is asking for forgiveness, repairing our past, and of course, doing tshuva. And this is really the overarching theme that I would like to discuss with you today. So I'd like to get into the text of this week's Torah portion. Let me just find it. Okay, so let me just find this. Again, just give me a minute. Here we go. Okay, here we go. I should be able to get it now. Okay, here we go. Is it? Yes, this is it. Perfect. Okay, so as I mentioned to you before, that the first section of the Torah portion was the section regarding the first fruits. And now there is an injunction that Moses is bringing to their attention. He starts a new conversation. And you see, it starts with the words, Hayom hazeh, Hashem Elekechem, mitzava lasos es hachokim ha'ela, ve'es hamishpatim, v'shemarta v'asisesem b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha. This day, God is commanding you to fulfill these statutes and ordinances, and you observe and fulfill them with all your heart and all your soul. Okay? Now, the question that Rashi brings up, okay, is this. Moses is about to enter into the land of Israel. Sorry, the Jewish people are about to enter into the land of Israel. Moses is about to not enter the land of Israel. When was the Torah given? The Torah was given the year the Jewish people came out of Egypt. The whole purpose of the exodus of Egypt was the receiving of the Torah. So the Jewish people come out of Egypt. They receive the Torah. Ultimately, they're condemned to being in the desert for 40 years, following the sin of the spies. They're condemned not to go into the land of Israel. But when do they receive the Torah? They receive the Torah 40 years before this date. And during those 40 years in the desert, while they were wandering, Moses was also teaching the Jewish people different aspects of the Torah as they were practicing to the best of their ability the Torah. He was teaching them different aspects of the Torah. So throughout the 40 years, they were getting explanations on the Torah. When they come into the land of Israel, they had studied the Torah for 40 years. What Moshe is giving them is just a reminder. The book of Devarim is a reminder book. And yet, when he talks about going into the land of Israel, the language that Moses uses is very much in the present. Moses says, Hayom hazeh, this day, Hashem Elekechem mitzavcha la'ases hachukim ha'ela. On this day, God is requiring of you that you should do these mitzvot. And the question that the commentaries immediately bring up, and certainly Rashi brings up, is this. What do you mean that God is this day commanding you to do the mitzvot? Today is not the day that God commanded the Jewish people to do the mitzvot. The Jewish people have been commanded to do the mitzvot 40 years before in the giving of the Torah. If anything, God is reminding them of their obligation. Moses is reminding them of their obligation. But that's not what Moses says. He says, Hayom hazeh, on this day, Hashem Elekechem, God, your God, mitzavcha, in the present, in the present tense, God is commanding you, present form, to do these mitzvot, and to do them with all your heart and all your might. And so Rashi immediately notices the anomaly. And Rashi has a question. Rashi says, Hayom hazeh Hashem Elokeichem etzavcha. And clearly the question is what? The question is, what do you mean today? God didn't command these things today. God commanded the Jewish people at Sinai. Sinai happened when? 40 years before our Torah portion. The Jewish people are about to enter into the land of Israel. It's a new generation. It's a Torah that they had with them already for 40 years. It's not a new Torah. So Rashi says, why is God speaking in the present through Moses? Why is Moses speaking in the present? God is not commanding the Jewish people in the present. And Rashi says this, the Chol Yom, every single day, Yiyu beinecha chadashim. It should be in your eyes like new. It should be a new idea for you. Ki'ilu by mitztafti alehem, as if today I commanded this on you. So Rashi is saying, very simply, Rashi is saying, okay, right. The question is, God did not command us today. So what Rashi is essentially saying is this. He's saying the reason why Moses is using the language of the present and the injunctions are in the present as if God is giving the Torah today is because we have to approach the Torah. We have to have an attitude to the Torah as if it is brand new. And as if we received the instruction today, because we know that novelty is something that attracts our attention. Novelty when something is new and fresh, and an old Torah, a past tense Torah, is something that's not so interesting. But a new Torah is something that is interesting. So we have the Chol Yom Vayom, in every single day, it should be new to your eyes. That's what Rashi says. As if today you were obligated with this, okay? This is what we call the pshat, the plain meaning of the words and of the language. God is telling us, Moses is telling us today meaning have the enthusiasm today as you would for any other time. It's interesting that there's a great deal of discussion in the commentators about this idea of Hayom. And furthermore, what is true is that in this week's Torah portion and throughout the end of the Torah, we find the use of the word Hayom today repeated over and over and over again. And I want to bring another idea to your attention. If I could just throw it out there for a second. Can anyone from the top of their head, with your familiarity with the liturgy of the high holidays, does anyone remember a part of the high holidays that uses the word Hayom today?
I don't know what the name is of the prayer, but it's Hayom, Hayom, Hayom. And it goes on
yes.
a lot.
Yes. Who's speaking? I don't see you.
Charlotte, I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So there is a very important component in the Rosh Hashanah service that is repeated over and over and over again, actually, is the prayer of Hayom Harat Olam. Today is an awesome day. And of course, every congregation and every nusach is going to be singing it differently. Right after the shofar blowing, that's right, Heidi. So right after the shofar blowing, there's two little verses that we say. One is Areshet Tzifasenu, Yerav Lefanecha, that the words should rise before God. And the other one is Hayom Harat Olam. And the way everyone has their own song and their own melody in the Chabad melody. I don't know if it's Chabad, but in the way I was raised, it could be also in other congregations. It's Hayom Harat Olam. Very introspective, you know. Hayom Harat Olam. Hayom Hayom Yamid Mishpat Kol Yitzurei Olamim Im Kivanim Im Kavadim Im Kivanim Rachameinu Yirachem Avadim Im Kavadim Eineinu Lecha Tiluyot Ad Shitchaneinu V'totzi Or Mishpateinu Ayam Laha. So this is a song of the Harat Olam. I find it especially evocative because we're basically saying to God, God, today is a day, an awesome day. And we turn to you and listen to us. Now, if you choose to see us as children, see us as children. If you choose to see us as your supplicants, your servants, see us that way. But whatever it is, get it done. I find it very, very moving because there's something about being a child that's very touching, and there's something about being a servant that's very touching. Each one carries its own type of relationship. But what we see is that this prayer is repeated over and over and over again every time we blow the shofar. Hayom Harat Olam. And there is a concept that we find that when the rabbis deducted the ways that we understand the importance or the intersection of ideas, there is a concept that is called two verses that have similar languages, or the repetition of a certain word. And this is one of the 13 principles of deduction that the Talmud offers, that when you have what we call a double language or a repetitive language. So when we have that, when we have one word that is not, let's say, a usual word, we don't find the word Hayom so often in the Torah. We find it more in the book of Devarim, the book of reprimand. And then when we have Hayom so central to the liturgy and the shofar blowing of Rosh Hashanah, there is a definite connection between this Hayom and that Hayom. So this is, by the way, one of the ways that the rabbis interpret the Torah is this concept of seeing a language that is repetitive and finding a connection or intersection between the two of them. So Hayom Harat Olam and the Hayom of Devarim are intersected because Devarim is always read before Rosh Hashanah. Devarim is a reminder of the mitzvot, and Hayom is a reminder of the mitzvot. So there's this intersection. But more than that, we find it's very interesting that another set of another language, which is in the same family, as it were, of Hayom, is the word atah. You know, there's two words atah in Hebrew. One is with the ayin, and one is with the aleph. The word atah with the aleph means you. The word atah with the ayin means now. So what we find is that the word atah is not used very often, and the word hayom is not used very often. The first time the word atah, which means now, so we have now as atah, hayom, today, which are basically similar words, similar ideas, is when Adam and Eve sin with the tree of knowledge. In the aftermath of that, God speaks to Adam, and he talks to him and he says, Atah, like, now, what are you going to do? Now that this has happened, what are you going to do? And the rabbis say that there's a medrash that says that basically there's a connection between the idea of now and tshuva, so that because it's so rare, and the first time we come across the word now in the Torah to begin with, the first time it ever manifests itself is in a concept of tshuva, in the concept of repairing something that is done. There is an inherent relationship with the concept of atah, now, and tshuva. and the concept of Hayom and Tshuva. So we see that Hayom today is connected to Rosh Hashanah, and also that the idea of now, present tense, the first time that word is used, and it's not a word that's used very often in the Torah, is used when Adam sins from the tree. So the commentators and the sages say there is an inherent connection between the concept of now and repair. So what's the connection of now and repair? What's the connection of now and Rosh Hashanah? Today and Rosh Hashanah. And I saw a beautiful teaching, and I want to share this with you because I found it very inspiring and very uplifting. So I heard this beautiful teaching, and it goes like this. When a person does tshuva, when we try to repair for the wrong of our past, we look back, right? When we are concerned for the future, we look forward. But when we talk about tshuva, when we talk about repair, the language is always in the present. It's not in the past and it's not in the future, it's in the present. So we have here the Hayom, we have with Adam and Chava, the Atah. So the present weighs very heavily. And how is that? How is it that the present is connected to the concept of repair when repair is really something that we do for something that happened or something that we did, participated, or regret from our past? If we regret from our past, what is the connection to the present? Present is present, but the past is the past. And while we are in charge of the present, we are not in charge of our past. Like they say, it's water under the bridge. It's too late. The past is the past. Time operates, at least within our universe, outside of the universe, and certainly in God's machinations, this is not true, but time operates in a linear fashion. That means that we go forward and we cannot go backward. And we only have the moment that we have right now in our control, because time is linear. So what's this connection between the present and fixing the past, if the past is the past? And this is the idea that I would like to share with you. A beautiful concept. Why is the present connected to tshuva? Why is the present connected to what happened to us in the past? The present is connected to us in as much as that if whatever we did in the past still is part of us today, that means it's unresolved, it hasn't been addressed, it hasn't been repaired, it hasn't been changed, then the past is very much our present. So for example, we can be living with a regret. We can be living with the outcome of a behavior. We can be dealing with the aftermath of a choice. And so long as we have not rectified this idea in our past, it's not in our past. It's very much in our present. We're bringing it along with us wherever we go. So the past is only the past if it's rectified, dealt with, and organized. Otherwise, we deal with it everywhere we go. And this is why people will go to therapy for something that happens in the past. Why? Because it's carrying along with them. It's with them wherever they go. So what we can't change the past, but we can change our present. And to the extent that we allow our past to kind of spook our present, it's not our present, we're still living in the past. So the past and the present, while it's true that tshuva is involved with the present, if we haven't let go of the past, it's still part of us. So let's say there's a regret that we live with, either a sin of commission that we did or a sin of omission, something that we should have done and we didn't do. We have a lost opportunity that we mourn. We have to rectify it. We have to deal with it. whatever it is. And by the way, there is a concept that we find in Torah law and in Jewish custom called tikkun. Tikkun means literally repair. I repair a damage that I've done in the past. And the way we repair a damage is by doing something positive to counterbalance that damage. So for example, I'm going to give you an example. If someone regrets a choice they made, and then the pain of that regret, the sheer rawness of that regret propels them to do something powerfully good in the present, that past is no longer their past. It's been uplifted by an act in the present. So let's say we know that in the Jewish tradition, often people will go to a rabbi and say, Rabbi, I did such and such and such, and my heart is broken for it. What's my tikkun? Today, people don't do it as much, but they should. Obviously, you have to go to a rabbi who is knowledgeable in what mitzvot and what actions are connected to tikkunim. A person has to be almost like a soul master. A person has to be like a spiritual guide. But in that realm of the past, there are things we could do to fix the future. And in doing so, what we're doing essentially is we are actually taking our past and we are redesigning it so that it becomes part of our present. To the extent that we carry it along with us, we're still living in the past. If we worry about the future, we're not living in the present. And I think one of the great sources of anxiety, one of the great sources of difficulty that we have in our lives is this pull to the past and this concern for the future. We're worried about the future and we feel bad about the past. And therefore, where are we? We're everywhere but the present. So being focused in the present is very much connected to the concept of tshuva, because tshuva means that right now, at this moment, at this time, what am I doing now to rectify whatever I'm dragging along from the past? And what am I doing now that I don't have to worry about the future? So there is this shift between the past being the burden to the past being something that propels us forward, and the future being something that we still have to do. So there is this concept of past and present that is melded into the future that we cannot divorce unless we address it. So to the extent that we're still haunted by our past, we're not living in the present. And as long as we're not living in the present, we're not taking advantage of the things that we can do. So sometimes all we need to do is to give some charity. Say, you know what? When I have this bad feeling of not having done X, Y, and Z, I will give charity to someone who can do this. So let's say, for example, a person had a difficult relationship with their child that they can't necessarily change now, but they can perhaps help someone else not make that mistake. And in doing so, they liberate the pain because they transform that pain into action. So really, what Moses is telling the Jewish people as he's going into the land of Israel is you have to live in the present. If the Torah to you is something that was given to your grandparents, if the Torah is not something that you feel is given to you every single moment, you're not taking advantage of the Torah and you're not really connected to the Torah in the way that you should be. And don't worry about the future. You look at the Jews in the desert, they were consistently looking back and looking forward. They were never in the present. Like, for example, you see that one of the great sub-themes that we find in the Torah when the Jews are traveling through the desert is that they talk often, Zacharnu et fill in the blank. We remember the whatever that was in Egypt. We remember Egypt so fondly. Egypt was so great. And this is also true for all of life, that sometimes, when we're in a certain stage of life, we're so busy in that stage and we're so consumed with whatever it is in that stage. And we we look back later and say, oh, but that was the time where I was really shining. That moment, that era was, I wish I can go back to that time. And there are people that get stuck in that. They get stuck in, if I only should have, if I only could have, if I only could go back to that time and fix that time. And what happens is that all the opportunities that present themselves in the present are ignored because they're still looking backwards. They're looking back to the time that they could have done this and they should have done that. And to be human is to be fallible. I mean, there is no human being that walks this earth that is infallible. The Torah does not believe infallibility. Even our greatest tzaddikim, our holiest of men, our most righteous of rebbitzins, the most pristine people that we look to as role models and say, if only I could be like them, are also riddled with fallibility. It is part and parcel of the human condition. So what we have in the Torah, we have no saints, right? We don't have a word for saint. We have a word called tzaddik. What's tzaddik? Tzaddik is righteous. What's righteous? Righteous is someone who has mastered the art of being righteous, meaning that throughout life, they may have struggled to overcome certain behaviors and they have mastered it so that they're, compared to us, they are righteous, but compared to their own potential, they may not be. And that's why we have a concept in Jewish life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu medaktik im hatzadikim kechut hatza'ira, that God examines or is precise with righteous people like the breath of a hair. In other words, to the extent that a person is capable of rising above their human frailties, they are expected to do so. So the better you are, the more is expected of you. This is, we expect differently from a 7-year-old and a toddler. A toddler will knock something over and we forgive it. A 7-year-old, a little less so. A 15-year-old that will be full on angry. You should know better. And so that's just, the truth is also with the human condition. But the idea that there are people that are somehow infallible does not exist in Torah. The question of what is their frailty, what is their sin? Well, compared to us, that sin looks like a mitzvah already. Because there are some people that just are capable to overcome their tendencies, and not necessarily naturally. There are two types of righteous people. Our Torah tells us some are born just without the tremendous temptation of a Yetzer Hara. Different people have different passions. Some are born without that temptation, and some are born with a stronger personality and they overcome. I heard a story that touched me, that there was this young man back in the 1950s or early 60s, and he came from a very traditional home, but he was in love with a non-Jewish girl. And she wasn't interested in converting, she wasn't interested in Jewish life, and he just couldn't part with her. And he came to the Rebbe for guidance and inspiration. In those days, Rebbe saw people in one-on-one audiences. And he said to the Rebbe, I don't know if I can overcome this struggle. I'm so in love with her, even though I know this will perhaps end my children's connection to Judaism. And that matters a lot to me. It's not that it doesn't matter to me, but I'm so in love with her. I don't know if I'll be able to let go. And he said, this is a struggle that is just eating me up. I can't, I don't, this is something that it's just really, really hard, Rebbe. And you know what the Rebbe answered him? The Rebbe said to him, I envy you. And he was shocked. And he said, what do you mean? He thought he didn't hear right. The Rebbe said, I envy you. And he said, you envy me? What do you mean you envy me? And the Rebbe said, you have a struggle that I would never have. And so you have, if you overcome the struggle, you have a capacity to reach to a place that I could never reach. Because I don't have such a struggle. So you have a greater potential than I do. And this actually touched the person very deeply. And actually that gave him the strength to overcome the situation. But the Rebbe wasn't talking semantics, it was real. I know for myself, I never had a struggle to eat non-kosher food. It was never a struggle. And why was it never a struggle for me? I don't know. But I was raised in a strictly kosher home. And it never dawned on me to want to eat not kosher food. But when I encounter people that struggle and have enjoyment of non-kosher food, and then choose not to, I look at them and I see them as like so much greater than I could ever be. Because the struggle that they have is not a struggle that I have. So it turns the whole idea of righteous on its head. Righteous is not the person that checks all the right boxes and does all the right things. Righteous is the person that overcomes the struggle that they have. And every person has a different struggle. So that if I don't struggle with something, that doesn't make me more righteous. If I don't struggle with something, that means that I have an easier path to do the mitzvot. But if I struggle and I overcome, that means that I have overcome a much greater part of myself. And we all know what our struggles are. We all know where our Achilles' heels lies. We know where our weaknesses are. And it could be in a multitude of things. And I know when I overcome those struggles, or when I grow in my Judaism, then I feel like, okay, so now I'm becoming a Jew. You know, it's because so much of what I do is the way I was raised. So there's no struggle in it. But when I see someone who does struggle, then I look at them and go, wow. Like, I don't imagine what it could be like to have that struggle and overcome it. Though I have my struggles. We all do. So the idea of fallibility is part and parcel of the human condition. So that it's part and parcel of who we are. So the idea of tshuva, the idea of repairing the brokenness of either our souls, our psyches, our behaviors is also part and parcel of the Jewish tradition. I mean, we have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, the holiest of our days, the most important of our days is connected to repair. That means it's part and parcel of the human condition. But what happens to a lot of us, and I include myself in present company, is that if we become not obsessed, but we become stuck in an area where we want to repair, but we look back and you go, but it's behind us. It's too late. I already did this, or I already lost the opportunity to do that. And we think, okay, so there's nothing that can be done. And there we're living in the past because we're just stuck. We are stuck to the past. So tshuva is this. The tshuva of the present and capturing the present is this. I do not bring my past with me. I repair my past. That's what tshuva is. God is not expecting us to undo what we did. It's impossible. In the laws of physics, that's impossible. We are human beings and we're defined by the time-space continuum. Like we work within a rubric. But what we could do is we can take the acknowledgement, the awareness of the past, and not just carry it with us, but transform it so that it becomes a stepping stone, and it becomes almost a point that brings us forward in the future in a positive way. So how do we, and in the Hasidic teachings talk about the idea of this concept of zidonos na'aseh l'zechuyot. Misdeeds become your merit. Now, not that they become forgiven, okay? Just hear that verse again. Zedonos na'aseh l'zchuyot. Your misdeeds become your merits. How is that possible? If someone ate, for example, not kosher food, how does that misdeed become their merit? Because if they do a complete and comprehensive tshuva, the enjoyment or the physical strength that they got from that nourishment is now elevated into something positive. So if doing a good deed, let's say giving someone tzedakah, doing something kind for someone else, as a repair for the time that you did not do that, now your negative experience becomes a precipice, and it becomes a point of beginning for the good that you are doing now, so that your past is no longer a burden that you carry. You know, people talk about, baggage. Everyone has baggage. So truly, baggage is not a healthy thing. It's if we carry the baggage with us, what does it do? Think about a person, use the imagery of a person that is carrying heavy bags. What happens when we carry heavy bags? We walk slower, we're slowed down. So having baggage is not healthy. But what happens if we open those suitcases up and we look inside? We say, what are we carrying from the past? What is in here that is slowing down my present and maybe even hurting my future in terms of doing the right thing? And we open it up and we say, I lost the opportunity to do this. It could be an opportunity with a family member. It could be an opportunity to honor a parent. It could be an opportunity to be present for a child, whatever it is. And now I'm going to take that pain, and I'm not going to just carry it with me, but I'm going to find a way to use that pain to propel me right now forward to do something positive in that realm, connected or not connected. And that will change the reality of my existence today. I know there was a woman, I shared this for sure in the past, that there was a woman who was a doctor in Auschwitz, or one of the concentration camps, I think it was Auschwitz. And she had to perform abortions to save women's lives, because a woman that was found pregnant, it was an immediate death sentence. There was a few women who were able to carry, I think less than 5, that were able to carry a baby, but sometimes the baby was killed after birth. There were, I think, 2 babies that actually made it out of Auschwitz alive. But if a woman was pregnant, it was a death sentence in the concentration camps. And so there was this woman who carried out a lot of abortions in order to save lives of women. And after the war, she moved to Israel. And in as much as the reason why she was doing all these abortions was to save the lives of the women, and in that case, she was doing a big mitzvah, she still felt very burdened by the fact that she had taken the lives of all these yet to be born children. And it burdened her. And so what did she do? She became a midwife, and she helped deliver, I don't know, I think the number was in the hundreds of thousands of babies. That's all she did. I don't even know if she had her own children. It's possible that she didn't have children, but she was known. She was one of the best midwives, and she would not stop delivering babies. And she became so good at it that when people had her as a midwife, the experience was completely different. And so she helped bring thousands and thousands and thousands of children into this world. This is tikkun. Tikkun is not that you are burdened by the past, because tshuva and Rosh Hashanah and doing better is very much connected to the present, living in the now. If we see every single second, like Rashi says, "B'chol yom v'yom yiyu beinecha kechadashim," every single moment, see this as a brand new experience, a brand new teaching. If we live in the present, even if we're informed by the past, but we transform our past so that it doesn't burden the present, but on the other hand, it vivifies the present, it lifts the present, It brings us to do wonderful, good things, whether it is, giving charity. Sometimes we can't physically undo something that we did in the past, but giving charity for those who do get involved in these things is a very tangible and easy way to overcome a problem in the past. That the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya talks about the virtue of giving tzedakah as one of the most potent activities to connect with the divine. And right up there with the study of Torah, and in some cases even says the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, he says even more than the study of Torah, because it's a very physical thing. Money, and in old Hasidic parlance, they would say that Geld is blata, money is mud. Money is the essence of physicality. It comes from work, our careers, commerce, living in this world. Money is the essence of physicality. So sometimes just giving tzedakah, and always giving a little bit more than feels comfortable. I think when we give tzedakah, it should hurt us just a bit. I think if we give enough that feels comfortable, that just assuages our conscience, and we feel we gave tzedakah. But we should give tzedakah, I think, in a way that just pinches a little bit, pinches in a way that we think that I would not have given as much. So tzedakah is a very good way to repair the past. But there's a million other ways. The Torah has 613 mitzvahs, probably 300 that we can keep today. There's a myriad of things that we can do. Visiting the sick, giving money for a bride to get married, giving money to children who are at risk. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's a myriad of things that we can do. But the most important thing to remember is that in the Torah's perspective, when Moshe was talking to the Jewish people, he was talking to them in the present. Because the most powerful thing that we have is the moments that we have right now. And worrying about the future, or even not working on our future, saying, what can I do in the future that I don't repeat this mistake? If we don't address our present, we will bring the negativity into the future. So to the extent that we can to the extent that we can change our past and our future, it lies completely in the present. And that's why we have to take every single moment and use every single moment, especially these days. We're in the month of Elul. It's a month that the Torah tells us is Chodesh HaRachamim. It's a month of compassion. It's a month where God has compassion on us. We have to have compassion for others. We also have to have compassion for ourselves, because sometimes that's the last ones on our list. We have to have compassion for ourselves. We have to do good in a way that brings out the best of ourselves. And I would say that giving extra charity every single day in the month of Elul, saying an extra verse of prayer every single day in the month of Elul, is a way of living very much the present, and to reach out to people who we need to repair a relationship with, which is probably one of the hardest things to do, because it involves our ego. And ego is something that we have in order to protect our fragile selves. But that being said, the present is so powerful. We have to tap into it. Moses understood this 40 years after the Jewish people received the Torah. He was talking to them in the present tense. He said, today you're receiving the Torah. Each and every one of us are receiving the Torah. B'chol yom v'yom. Every single day we have to see ourselves when we wake up in the morning and we have a new day as a new opportunity to fix our present and to do it good in our present. And sometimes we have to take the past and transform it. And when we do that, by the way, if there's something that we're carrying as baggage from the past, and we do something concrete to address it in the present, so we do something good and kind and benevolent, and whether it is a relationship with God or a relationship with another person, a mitzvah that we should have done and a mitzvah that we didn't do, or a misdeed that we did that we regret, whatever it is. I mean, as I mentioned, we are human, so there's going to be a whole bunch of things. But to remember every single day, to wake up and say, today is today, right now is now, and now is where it's at, and that's where I change myself, and that's where tshuva lies. Tshuva lies in the present. So I'm wishing everyone a very empowered week, a week of being present and start your morning off with just a couple of moments of that kind of introspection. It's going to change your week. And it's going to change the way you go into the high holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me and wishing you a successful week.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.